Etherpad. You can find the easiest way to get there is through the tools page. So if you go tools.ietf.org/wg/netmod and click on minutes, you'll find Etherpad for 102. And we'd really appreciate everyone in the room helping to contribute to those notes in real time. And I think with that, we're at the start of the session. Welcome to our second Netmod session. This is the last session for us, obviously, at the IETF. There's one more session after this, but we won't be there. Thank you for sticking with us. We have about a half-full agenda, and I know there was one additional discussion topic that we were expecting an AD to talk about, and I think he stepped out, so he'll come back in, and we'll have that conversation when he's ready. So I'm Lou Berger, Kent Watson, Joel Jagway, and we have Michael taking notes here, as well as our secretary. Given that this is the last day of the meeting, I think everyone should be familiar with the note well. If for some reason you're not, please take a look at the URL on the bottom. Just be aware, anything you say here is part of our permanent record. We are sending and recording video. We do have people remote. It's very important that if you speak at the mic, to say your name, and I apologize if I forget to do that. We have blue sheets circulating, sign those, and we already talked about Etherpad, and our agenda is online and unmodified. This is the second session. You're here. We don't talk about, remind you that it's there. So these are the topics that we had scheduled, and that continues to be our plan. These two presenters let us know at the last minute that they are presenting via MeetEcho. We went through this in the first session, so I don't see any reason to do it again. If you have questions, please feel free to come to Mike. And with that, we're going to jump into the...
Just for a note, for those that are on MeetEcho, there's about 18 people in the room, I think. So 1/3 of what we had last time, perhaps less.
Yeah. Alex?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Is the mic on? So good morning, everybody. I'm Alex Kern. I'm going to present on the comparison NMDA data stores. This is a new 0-0 graph, but it's actually not that new. This is a graph that was previously in the Netmod working group. That basically was the outcome basically at last time was that it should be moved from Netmod into Netmod. So and also now with an additional border and here. So basically what this is also getting this graph defines an RPC, the regulated model RPC that allows to compare energy and data source in order to really be able to detect if there are any discrepancies between them, if there are, for instance, certain things that are not propagating from within corporation and so forth as expected or as intended, and that's also to help with factors such as need troubleshoot provisions due to unexpected failures due to failure or time lags and propagation. We've mentioned it succeeded in phases this earlier graph. In terms of changes from the earlier revision, there's a few small changes that were also discussed here without getting into the discussion. One thing is basically the comparison now includes the pre-clustering set by default. The two X2 in data from the comparison schema not within the scope of both data stores. So this basically means that when we have configuration false data, and you're comparing configuration data store with operation data store, that data will be excluded from the comparison because it will be kind of meaningless. Because obviously there will be difference there. Second aspect is that the original metadata is included in the comparison. So basically, there is a discrepancy, or there is a difference. This provides additional information to see which persons where the difference, to help explain where the difference came from. And in fact, basically, now we will actually some examples. This is just the overall structure of the module. It hasn't changed much, but there's a little bit more. Well, just basically the things to point out. So it's really very straightforward. You have a certain source, you have a target, you have a filter, or what is it you want to compare. You have flag indicator, you want to have full comparison on the schema nodes, and there's like both data source, and then the differences themselves in the output are reported data, and you can go to the end. And basically all I have, and the request here is to ask for introduction.
Comments?
Hello, my name is Qiu. For this NMD comparison, actually, I think it's very good, actually, I suppose, to adopt this kind of work. But I have one comment, actually. When you say we compare two data store, do you actually compare two data store with the same schema, or you compare one data store with different schema, or you compare maybe one data store at two different time point. Take example, if you compare two data store with the same schema, maybe you can compare running with intent. If you allow to compare data store at two different data point, for example, take operational data store as an example, you can compare operational data store at time 1 and operational data store at time 2. So these two cases will be allowed, right?
Yeah, so basically this here does not include the timing aspect. So basically the expectation that you compared at the same point in time. Regarding the nodes, obviously this is basically that was basically the data nodes get compared to schema node is within the scope of both data stores. You can override this using this flag if you want to have just a full comparison, which include also which will then actually include all data nodes which are related to schema nodes which are not in both trees. But there's no time option. There's no state aspect, if you will. So basically, this is basically the expectations that comparison. Basically, the RPC is performed when it is requested. So what you suggest is might be a potential.
Yeah, I just want to compare because with the pre-filtering mechanism, you can compare two data store with different schema, right? Because you have pre-filter.
And you could. So basically, this is essentially there's this leaf that says all from the top that you see there. That is basically the flag. Normally, you would not set it, and basically only include the nodes which are in both data stores. But if you say all, it's basically a complete comparison.
One more comment actually is so when you actually do this NMDA. Compare actually maybe you need to some trigger maybe server send some notification maybe for example just as Magnus discussed maybe for applied intent when applied intent get started when plan intent get a completed.
So basically this here is an RPC. So basically this comparison is what the draft defines is basically how to do this on demand. Now I think what you're alluding to is could you define an automatic trigger? Could you maybe define some event notifications about where you subscribe to changes and so on? Those things are possible, but this is not within the scope of this draft. Not at this point.
Okay, thank you for clarification.
Robert and Cisco. So I like the draft. I think it's a good idea. It's doing the right sort of things. To echo Chin's comment, I think it makes sense to maybe clarify
when the schema differs between two data stores, what that means. So I don't know if the draft already says that means that the data will automatically be excluded from the comparison if it's potentially one node in one schema and one's in another.
So can you clarify this a little bit? Because what do you mean by that? Because you kind of the explanation is hard for us, right? It can only tell you that it's different. It does indicate the origin, the metadata, which might be an explanation, but is this what you had in mind, or do you have more in mind?
It's not, so one comparison you do is just on the data instances, and you're just comparing whether the values are there in the two data stores. It's not given to me that if, for example, the operational state data store does not implement some of those, it's deviated or removed them, then you want to always flag those up as being diffs. So I think you need to just consider that sort of case and maybe have another option to say whether or not that's reported or not. I can talk to you offline afterwards if that's.
Okay.
And then one other comment, you can go back to your original slide that you had, just on the back one. The origin metadata included in comparison, which I think is good. But again, I would potentially have an option to choose whether or not to include that in the diff or not.
Which was
The origin metadata.
Oh.
Because you may want to compare, know if the origin is different, and you may not care. You just care if the values are different or not. So
we could include a flag essentially that you say to control
but report it if the origin is different as well.
Rajahotka, I read the draft and I think it's really useful work and I support adopting it as a working group item. One use case actually could be in connection with my draft on RESTCON with transactions, just as an aid for merging the staging repository into running or something like this. So I really would like to see this adopted.
Thanks.
Balázs, then there are maybe some beginner questions. In the Yank patch, as I understand, there is many ways to describe, let's say, adding a new leaf. Will you specify this, let's say it's always a create or always a merge operation, or I'd like it to be just one way?
I mean, basically on this, we thought basically the best way to represent this is really actually to latch onto Yank patch, because that has to solve the equivalent problem. And obviously with Yank patch, you don't apply this to configuration files data, but basically we should essentially follow the same.
But I think even in Yank patch, you have multiple ways to declare, isn't it, that you have merged or you added created a new leaf? It would be good to have just one way to detect when you get this notification, get the result.
I mean, you get the result, the difference. I guess the question is, do you feel that the draft should specify more, basically the algorithm, if you have multiple options?
Well, what I'm thinking is that if I add a leaf on the CLI, then I would always like to get create leaf instead of sometimes create, sometimes merge, maybe a replace.
Mm-hmm.
So just having one way to parse it would make it easier for the user.
Okay. Well, so I guess the question is how this came into being, how the difference came into being. That is something that is also nothing that I mean, when you compare it, you may not know basically why that difference occurred. And so I think what you're describing, probably you would need to know that. So one question would be where you can answer that. I mean, I do think certainly basically if it's in, well, ambiguous is the wrong term, but basically if there are multiple options and where it's basically underspecified for what you should do or what you can do, then I agree actually that we should actually incorporate that. But where it needs to include, where that information would need to include the causation of how that difference came into being, that I'm actually not sure if we can do this here, because really we can only see, oh, I have those two data sources. Obviously there's a discrepancy or difference, but why that occurred, if it is you may not have
I agree that it's enough to indicate the difference there. I'm not just so much interested in whether the original request was a netconf merge or a CLI or maybe a system internal, whatever. Another, just a fun question. I don't know if you need to handle it. Theoretically, I think it's possible to have different features activated in different data stores. Will you say something about that? Is that the same or not? It would be a strange situation.
Well, maybe that's an addition, okay, maybe that's something that we should actually put for the data store schema nodes, right? Because obviously if you're having in feature differences, that would explain that. Okay. Yeah, okay, this does not specify that, but that's a good point. We may want to mention that.
So, Rashad from Cisco. Non-technical question. You said you moved to Netmod from NetConf because this specifies a Yang data model. But there is a new RPC also defined, right? So I didn't follow this draft, so I don't have the history.
So that was basically, well, the history is that we had a similar discussion in NetConf, and the recommendation of the room was the recommendation of the chairs. At this point was to move it from NetConf to Netmod simply because it does not affect really the NetConf protocol, or it would be equally applicable, basically. And really, basically, it's a Yang data model. But again, it could go either way. This is actually why we had initially put it into NetConf. But if it's better in Netmod, I'm fine with that. I don't know. Maybe that's a question to the chairs, maybe specifically to Kent, because you are in both groups.
Well, right, I mean, but because it was so, seemed very integrated into the NMDA work that we were doing.
Yes.
And so it seemed like this would be a more general location for it.
Yes.
Yeah, as it's something that's generic to Yang, it sort of makes sense that it be here. So I agree with the NetConf chair.
Okay.
Any other comments? How many people think that this is a worthwhile function for the working group to work on or standardize? I would say that's a really good number. How many people have read the document? Also a really good number. How many people think that this should be the start of our work? That is, adopt this. Also a really good number. And by the way, compared to the number that Kent mentioned earlier, we have about double the people in the room. No, not two. Well, okay, fine. Does anyone object to adopting this? None. So that seems like pretty strong consensus of the room. We'll take it to the list. Thank you.
Too many mice.
Next presenter, if they come up. Everyone?
Hello. This is the second presentation about this topic after IETF. So, yeah, in some cases, it is good to document instance data of Yang data stores, not just making it available via RESTconf or NetConf or CLI or whatever, but document it as a file as well. Last time we have seen some reasons for it, but the two main use cases we have is server capabilities. A lot of our server capabilities are actually documented in Yang modules, like the library sets that the previous draft will also be using, NetConf monitoring has NetConf capabilities. CCamp is working on a standard alarm module that will document the alarms that the Yang server can emit. And then in the previous NetConf meeting, we had the Yang push notification capabilities from myself. It's also using the same thing. Most of these capabilities are actually fixed at design time or implementation time, if you want. Yes, it is possible to have new modules loaded runtime, but that's the exception case, I would say. Yes, it's possible to have new alarm times added in runtime, but again, that's the exception. There are people who very strongly need this server capability information in design time. So NMS developers or anyone who's wants to integrate his management systems with a new Yang server, new network node, he has to work on the node and the integration before he gets a node available. Also, the idea that everyone will have a node available and can query, let's say, the set of modules implemented by that node, that's a very expensive proposition. This Netcom management system can easily handle dozens of node types. Putting that into the same lab, that would be very expensive. Also, we would like some standard format for documentation. We already have that for the online format, Yang and RESTconf, NetConf. Why not use that for offline documentation as well? The other use cases that a number of operators and number of implement vendors are already using is that there are some data where you can preload predefined data, again in design time. Typical examples is this access control. You can define your access control roles and groups and rules anyway, but often the vendor will present you with a predefined set of groups, like read-only system administrator, making it life easier. Already a startup, you have something, and then you are free to modify it as much as you like. And actually, setting up access control is a big work, so having a good starting point is good. Monitoring routines, so if you have a new node, not a standard router, which everyone knows, but some more exotic node, it is good that if the vendor gives you that, if you monitor these 10 things on the node, then you are more or less okay for at least for the beginning. So document, again, these things that are really defined in Yang data modules, NACON model or any other performance management model, and at least document what should be there, potentially use it for preloading the system as well. So for these two use cases, I defined two instance data formats. Actually didn't define that much. I tried to use existing stuff. XML and JSON format are defined with the potential for later CBOR or any other format that's defined by IETF. But at least XML and JSON I think should be enough for now. Added some metadata, the name of the instance data set, when it was done, contact information, and the internal, really the meat of it will really just have to follow the target module, so NACON or IETF Yang library. There are two things that make this a bit more user and more usable. So configuration and state data might be defined in the same one, because this is not really about the usual RESTconf, NetConf interface. If it's preloading or just documenting, then you might easily document read-only data as well, like the set of data modules you support. And also often only partial data sets are supplied, which means that some of the Yang constraints like min elements or mandatory might be violated here. It might be that completely different groups supply parts of the instance data. So since the last time there was updates to the draft. The first one is that earlier the draft said that you should document server capabilities in instance data files, kind of like a recommendation best practice. And I'll come back to this. At this point in the draft, it is just a primary use case, or the most important use case. The next one was to move this to Yang data extension. So the whole wrapper around the data is defined as a Yang data extension. Someone proposed it, and I thought that this is a good use case for Yang data extension, because this is not data that will go into the data store as such. The internal part, let's say that speaks only about the Yang modules, yes, that might go there. But the full instance data set, if you give, let's say starting here with instance data set name and revision of that, that will not go as such into the data store itself. Some people said that this might be more difficult to handle this way. Sorry. Okay. I'll come back to this during open questions, and I know that you have problems with this. Metadata that was defined as ordinary leaves instead of XML attributes and metadata according to the 7952 draft maybe, because it allows you to define it more precisely. Again, and the encoding of the data set in the file was clarified that you have an XML declaration, UTF-8 encoding, and you generally follow the XML and JSON encoding rules, and that answers a number of questions like white space adding and such things. One important point is that, yes, this instance data file can be used to document server capabilities or anything else, but these data can be modified later on, either by the system itself or maybe through management operations, and in this case, always the live data is the one that is valid. That should represent the current situation, not what we thought will be true. Hopefully, yeah, there should not be such differences, but in some cases there will be. So, open issues. Should we recommend that, as a general practice, that server capabilities should be documented in this form, or is that just a use case? Some people said that server capabilities is too uncertain. Some other people said that, yes, let's say just then the IETF Yang library, and then if something else comes up, we'll have separate drafts about that. I think this is a very important principle, and I would like to keep it there, but yeah, some people objected. Comments?
Roberts and Cisco, so I prefer that it's not in this document. So I'm not debating whether or not documenting the capabilities is useful. Actually, I do think it's a useful thing to do, but I keep this draft more abstract in terms of this is just how you do instance data. And you can use the capabilities as an example, effectively, in this draft, that's fine. But I'd rather have a separate draft that talks about device capabilities, and there's probably more stuff to say about them, and says that the way to do it is use instance data documents. And then in your previous slide, you said about comparing like old data and the current one. Again, that seems to be something to do with capabilities rather than...
No, that's also valid for the preloading case. If you think about the access control preloading case, which is one used widely, I think, that there it is very often that people will go in and modify the access control preloaded data later on.
But then I would describe this as saying this is just providing a snapshot of data at one point in time and leave it open. I mean, it's, of course, a document that's written to a file can't obviously update, and it's the context of how it's used that defines which one is the right one to use. I don't think this draft should say that. It seems a strange thing to say. This is just about how you represent Yang instance data.
Other people requested this explicitly to put this statement here.
Okay, I disagree.
Yeah, it's a snapshot. I fully agree with that, but I feel that's just a different wording of the same statement.
Camp Watson, Juniper Networks as a contributor. So I think maybe should is a good idea, but how would you, I mean, what would this, I don't think we could have a standard around how they would publish their instance documents.
This should be the standard that says that, yep, if you have a Yang model, this is the file format you have to use.
I didn't mean which format, I didn't mean what format, I meant like where would they put the file?
There was, maybe there still is a sentence that this should be some method that doesn't need a live node that much. And after that, yeah, it's like any other documentation. They can do what they want.
Yeah, Joey, I think we need the method there. Like, otherwise the should is kind of empty, right? I don't necessarily think that needs to be done in this draft, but like, you know, a normative reference to the pointer where it actually is, followed by this being in this ref until that gets solved,
like would be one way to describe that. But like, yeah, saying you should solve this problem in a particular way and not being able to do it is a bit of an implementation gap.
So you say that we should take this out of the draft for now, or Joe? I don't.
Well, I think the should is okay, but it's the, how would you expect implementations to do it? Maybe some guidance, some words. I don't think it really needs to be in another draft necessarily, but
I don't think we ever document how you document your.
you could say something like, for instance, implementations could post such files to their website.
That might be included.
Yeah, I mean, implementation advice is actually worthwhile sometimes, like, especially if it is necessary for interoperability in order to have two implementations do the same thing, right? This is from Jürgen, so I'm channeling, this is not my comment. I'm with Rob. The should, issue 1, is misplaced, a file format specification, in a file format specification. So he doesn't like it.
Thanks, Tim. Joe Clark, Cisco. So as part of the work in the Yang catalog, for the Yang catalog, at least Cisco has been trying to do, even before this existed, publish some of the device capability. In fact, the hello message is in GitHub. I'm not saying that that's how the how should be implemented. I'm just saying that when you, Balash, presented this, I thought this is the format we could use. I don't think, we would have to figure out how augment Yang data works. But to their point, if the should stays in, that could be another how in terms of publishing to the catalog.
I also think that this should not be in this document because this data format is quite generic and can be used for any number of other purposes. So I wouldn't mind if documenting server capabilities is mentioned as one use case, but I really support what Rob and Jürgen said. It should be a separate document if it's necessary to standardize some best practice or something.
Tim Karinoki, I'm trying to connect some dots here, right? There's some other drafts that talk about factory defaults or the default factory store. How is this any really different than a factory store?
Because the other draft said that you want to restore that. It didn't tell you how to document it really. This is more about getting information before you actually have the network nodes available.
Okay, so the fact that the factory store exists, just connecting dots. So the instance data is what you would expect from your manufacturing element, right?
Yes.
Okay. And it's provided outside the context of a deployed element, right?
Yes.
Into some location that you can obtain that contains the config data, right?
Website, yeah.
So it would be if I did a get, so if I had both of those together, if I did a get on the factory store, it would probably come with the same data that you would post it, right?
Yes, it should.
I'm just trying to connect all the dots together here.
So, Rob Wilson, Cisco. I'm not sure I agree with that answer. I'd have thought what's in the factory store is just the default configuration when the device comes up. So if you just power it on for the very first time, that's the configuration you get that gets written to start up or running. Whereas surely the capabilities data is just about what functionality the device can do, what protocols you can enable, or what features you can have, not Yang features, but what stuff it does. And it seems to be that's quite different.
Sorry, then maybe I misunderstand what you mean by factory store.
So there's another draft that defines is a factory data store that says this is the stuff you get if the box comes up first time.
Okay, so if I want to know what the default, I don't know, username and password is, right, for the config server, right? that was burned in in the manufacturing plant, that's the factory data store.
Yep.
Right?
But this doesn't state that you have to document the full factory default setting or default config in this format. This gives you a way to do that, but it doesn't prescribe you. This really is a way to document things, not a prescription what to document.
Okay.
A clarifying question, where's this factory store published?
Is it NetConf or? Sorry,
Right, so the
NetConf.
difference is that's from the box, that's from the device. Well, this is, what he's talking about is not. This you would get in separate documentation or through Yang catalog or some other place. And it's, the
Yeah,
place is
I
not.
understand that now. I was just trying to figure out what the contents of what that file would look like.
This doesn't prescribe the contents in any way. Even with the should removed, nothing.
So Rob Wilson, Cisco. So I just have one other comment that the capabilities information itself, I don't think you get interoperability if you just say you need to publish this data. You need to define a Yang model of what that looks like, don't you? Otherwise, just saying everyone should do this, I'm not sure how that helps the world alone.
I think, as an example, if I would get a set of supported or modules for every network node I'm getting, that would help me.
Yes.
Yes,
But then you,
capabilities generally is a bit loose term, I agree.
so I think it needs a definition. I think it's a definition of it needs to be a Yang model that defines what this capabilities data looks like. What does it contain? How do vendors extend it? Because otherwise, it's just, I get some random data. You should provide some random data that in some format. I'm not sure that helps.
It's random because you can immediately check which modules there are, and then if you find the one you need, then you're fine.
Well, you might return them. You might return the modules you need, and we might return something else. I mean, it's not defined unless you define it.
I would like then, either the chairs now or later on the mailing list, the second question, would you support some kind of draft defining what the capabilities means? And IETF Yang library is the first thing that comes to mind.
So from a chair standpoint, it is okay to have a should that says that an implementation should do a behavior, like report some information, but leave the how that is reported outside the document. We've done that a lot in many places. We might want to say have a document that talks about how that's done, and that could be a reference.
Yeah, if you
So you could do that. But I think this is both chair as contributor and contributor. If you follow what Rob's saying is, or following on what Rob says, if you have a should that you should have this capabilities that publishes instance data, you have to define what that instance data is. So if you want, I think if you want to try to keep this, you're going to have to define what the format is that you want to publish. You don't necessarily have to include the transport in this document. You can have that elsewhere, but you at least have to say what the information is that you're publishing.
Could you ask the room that, would they support such a separate draft about this that would define this?
Well, why don't we see what other comments are and see where we end up.
Thanks.
Kent from Juniper Networks is following up on Tim Carey's question. I think there's quite a difference between this and the factory data store effort. The factory data store is trying to capture the configuration that would go into startup on factory reset, where I view this as primarily capturing what would be in Yang library, and Yang library is purely an operational data store, so it's not actually, it wouldn't be found inside the factory.
You're right, but it's more. For example, we already use this for defining, predefining access control roles and rules, which is quite a big work to do, and it's good to have, and that's configuration. You could also use this for documenting that at factory default comes up with one Ethernet interface configured to whatever. So it's really free of use, but yes, you're right that much of this will be about state data or read-only data.
So it's more of a superset then?
Yes.
Adrian Farrell, yeah, at the moment, this seems a little bit of an apple pie draft. So it's, you know, telling people to do stuff that, yeah, it's a good idea to do, sensible to do, but I'm still waiting for the meat behind it. But what I actually wanted to ask you was, are you aware of the Ops Area Working Group work on mud? It's okay to say
somewhat, not much.
So at the moment, there's no overlap, but I see the trajectories overlapping sometime in the future. So MUD is talking about advertising what a device is and what its network requirements are, with a sentence that says, and in the future we will add description of more things that the device or the server or whatever can do. And I see this as possibly intersecting somewhere 2 years in the future or 3 years. So take a look at that and talk to those guys so that we all end up with only one way of doing things. Yeah, we've never ever had more than one way of doing anything in this organization.
I think what I know about their work, I think it's a very good proposal, and I'll try to follow up. On the other hand, this is something that's already happening.
So that's the MUD working group. Is that what you
Sorry,
said?
a working group.
Ops AWG.
Oh, okay. Obviously, I'm unaware of
Those
it.
drafts are advancing as we speak.
It's an Ops AWG, manufacturer uses description, that's just a separate document.
And that was Ignace RAD.
I don't remember the format they choose, but I'll have a look at it.
So as to whether we ask a question, this is an individual draft. So it's okay for you to ask the working group for direction on where you take your document. So you should feel free to ask questions of the working group.
So then I would like a show of hands. If who would support a separate draft, then that would describe what kind of server capabilities we should document. Okay, then
It's a few.
I'll write
Or
a
maybe a
short
little-
one, and then next time we can discuss it. Thank you. Okay, next question that came up was, okay, I say that I am documenting IETF Yang library, and that's contained in the instance data, that this is the module I'm providing data for, which version of that? But here we have a problem that I think we can't solve at this point, because using revisions is far too strict. Like, not many people are using import by revision either, and here it would be even more problematic. On the hand, if the versioning group can come up with a good solution, yeah, then we should reuse that. But I don't see using revision dates as a viable solution for this here, because most of the times instance data doesn't change when you make a small addition to your module. But potentially what I see is maybe a list of modules and revisions that is usable with this set of instance data set. Okay, what are your favorite questions? Should we use data extensions? Originally it was no, then someone said, and yeah, it's a general question to the chairs and maybe that document. What is the use case and the proposed use case for Yang data X? Any data that is not part of a Yang data store or some smaller set?
Yes. Any data that's not part of a data store?
Then this seems to fit.
Yeah, but on the other hand, without the data, Yang data extension, it just defines some schema. So if an author of a server, for whatever reason, decides to implement it, I don't see anything wrong on doing so, right? So it's, and the practical consequences of doing so, of course, are true. First, you cannot use tools for processing this module that do not support this extension. And I suspect this is why you didn't include ASCII tree of this module in your document because you cannot print it with Pang or whatever. And second consequence is that you have to have a normative reference to this Yang data extension in this draft. So this may of course delay its publication, I suspect a bit.
Probably it would be enough to reference the rest draft,
So
but
I would really suggest to do it in a way without, I don't see any problem with that. If it's not implemented, it's not implemented, but the schema is pretty clear from that. You can process it in any way you want, and I just don't see any reason for doing it here.
I don't really care. I just want consensus on this point. So,
You can ask the group.
so who is for Yang data extension? Or, yeah, let's-
Well, I'd like to ask a question. So when you say with the young data, I'm Shifun Lin from Water Networks. So when you say describe the instance data model, so which only like model name, instance name, the region, and those three or four things, right?
Yeah?
You're not trying to redefine the schema in the data store with this.
No. So
Right.
here we have two data modules, one that is defining the, let's say, the wrapper.
Only the wrapper
Yes.
format.
Has a big any data in the middle. And then we have the target data modules like IETF Yang library or NACM that I don't touch.
Yeah. In that case, I'm for that. So
So you are
we
for?
should use. Yeah, I think we should use the Yang extension, data extension.
Okay. Could everyone hands up who wants data extensions, who thinks it's a good idea? 4, 5. Okay, who?
So sorry, can you repeat that question? The data extension, you mean you want this draft already,
Use it in this draft.
Use it in this draft.
you mean Yang data?
The Yang data extension wrapper.
To use Yang data to capture the structure of Yang, okay, yes.
So it was against using Yang data extensions in this draft.
So you should report the results for
Okay.
people who are.
One against, and please once more, who thought using Yang data was a good idea in this
I
draft?
think you had, you know,
A reasonable number.
a reasonable to few number, somewhere there on the first one, and one or very few on the second.
Then Yang data stays. And I'll try to reference on the,
Just keep in mind, this is a individual draft, so you can do whatever you want independent of the working group, and the working group can chime in during adoption. So
Yeah.
just keep that in mind.
For now-
You have someone in queue over there.
yes?
Joe Clark, Cisco, at the risk of upsetting Lada. The Yang data extension, so you cannot define all the metadata that one might want to include with your instance data. So some solution to augmenting, to be able to say, I want to add or define this metadata, I think we need something for that.
So that would be a use case for the other
Yes,
working
that's
group
right.
document we talked about on whatever day it was, the first session,
Yeah.
that we really want the augment.
Yes.
Okay, then on the mailing list, another comment came up that shall we have a data store parameter following NMDA, that which data store is this, is the data, instance data defined here relevant for? But I think it was mostly you again asking for it. I didn't seem to understand the use case for it, because yes, if the data is config false, then it will always belong to the operational. If it's config true, then it belongs to either the running or candidate. The rest are not writable. Also, the whole draft doesn't really want to say anything about how this file is used. So some servers might use it to preload the data. Let's say have a, I don't know, config load command or something like that. Some might use it just for documentation. Some might populate it from software internally. So generally, we don't want to say anything prescriptive about how this is used. So I would not put in this parameter about the data store.
Rob Wilson, Cisco. So I think if a data parameter was included, it would be an optional thing. So you could include it was useful, but you wouldn't have to populate what it is. I think if it was to be defined. So I wouldn't regard it as something that's mandatory. It might be places where it's useful. Putting that aside, I'm not sure that your statement below in terms of it being config full state belongs to operational and config true belongs to running candidate. Is that going to actually work? Isn't this just data coming out of a data store? So if you have a schema node that's config true, but it's the data coming out of operational, you don't want to interpret half that data as being configuration, half of it being operational state. The whole lot's is operational states. So I think you at least need a flag to say, is this configuration data or is this state data?
I think that's stated already in the target data modules, and I really don't want to say more about it because this is what I wrote here about running candidate and operation. I would see that that's a typical use case.
Okay.
Typical, but for what I believe, but others might use it differently.
Okay, so to give you a concrete example, say you had a list of IETF interfaces, that's the data you're returning. In NMDA, those nodes are config true. So you're saying that by definition, those list of interfaces have to be configuration because the schema associated with them is config true. Whereas they might be interfaces that are just instantiated in the system that haven't been configured. So I think you need some more indication as to what the data is.
The point is that there are so many ways to use this that I really don't know what it would mean if I would put their operational, because I don't prescribe that this is loaded into configuration either today. I don't prescribe that it's not loaded. So what does it mean if I put their operational or running?
It's just providing context to allow somebody who's interpreting the data to understand what it means. I mean, does this mean configuration? You're saying automatically that will mean configuration because those nodes are defined in the schema as config true. But half the data in operational is going to be defined as config true. And you're now saying, well, actually, all that data is not state data. That's all configuration data because it's got config true schema nodes. It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, interfaces are, if in NMDA sense, they are both configuration and state data.
But that's true of all config true nodes in NMDA, all have this duality that they represent both configuration and their operational state value. So
could you write a short description of what does it mean? What is the difference to anyone if I write this as, let's say, an interface is operational or config?
He's suggesting that it's good context, that even if you don't use it, you at least know where it came from.
No, it came from a guy typing on the computer.
That's your use case. He has a different use case in mind.
Okay, I can put it there, but please help me with the description statement of that.
Okay.
A few times it seems like we're mixing some concepts which are really the data focused on data representation, and then other concepts, items that are focused on how we are moving that representation or storing that representation. And just like we have the separation between netmod and netconf, it'd be good to keep that separation in this work. You know, so the information related or description related to how you're representing the data, I think it's good to have in one draft, and how you are moving it around or storing it maybe belong elsewhere. And if it ends up here, great. If it ends up in netconf, fine. You know, but whatever.
I agree, and I would say that this is about representation of the data because I
agree. That's why I said it should be in this document, but occasionally it slips in, or slipped in our discussion. Or seems to be. Maybe I'm misreading it.
I'll add the attribute, and please help me with the
description. I'm just saying, just keep it in mind when moving forward. Okay. Again, it's an individual document, so you control the content.
Hopefully not for long. Anyway, so there was another question that the current draft says that you have one instance data set in one file, just as you have one Yang module in one file practically every time. Should we allow multiple instance data sets in a single file? I think it's not important, that it makes the world a bit more complicated. Yeah, it could be done, but I'm against it. The next one was, do we need to create tags like we have code begin and code ends today for Yang modules and for other things? Should we, if we would use such examples, for instance, data begins and instance data ends in a draft or an RFC, I would say no, because this would be typically used for examples in drafts. And even for the Yang modules, we don't use the code begin and code end tags. And yeah, probably in the examples, we might not need the wrapper about the instance data set, its name, its revision, and contact information. So yeah, proposal is not to have them. Okay, then there was a question that shall we have a revision of the instance data set itself? There is today a date revision included, but maybe a version like we have in the versioning draft, but it has problems. And I would say no, not now, because what does even compatibility mean for instance data? That's not a simple question and not defined. Yeah, yes?
Hi, Shivu from Netmod. So question about this side. So you say only one file can contain only one data.
One instance data set, but an instance data set can contain as many Yang modules, larger Yang modules as you like. So it can contain the whole configuration if you want.
I see, okay. Yeah, I'm trying to also connecting this draft with the factory default things. So factory default can specify one file with the other configurations, and we can point it to only one file. So that one file need to contain the whole data store, everything there.
You can define a factory default in one file, or you can say that I have factory default 1, 2, 3, or factory default ACM, factory default interfaces, and
I think they have that.
but it's just that you have to put it into multiple files. So,
I have one more comment. The draft also says that if this data is stored in a file, then the file name should encode the version. I think this is a really bad practice. Probably these files will often be stored in some kind of version management system like Git, and for such systems, this file name scheme is next to unusable, because with every revision you have to do something, so you can just commit it as it is. And given that all this data are stored as metadata inside the file, it shouldn't be needed to use the file name for encoding any information. So I would suggest maybe to leave this prescription completely. Just the file name can be anything. It's not so important in my view, of course.
I think your problem is real, and we faced it as well. And 95% of the cases we don't use the revision date in Yang modules either. In some cases it is good, and in some cases it is good that the tools will allow it. I thought following the Yang practice, maybe and adding comments about version control would be good, but is that okay with you okay, then I'll add note that usually avoid, because of version control problems, the revision date in the file name. So how I see it, next step is I would like to ask for the adoption of this draft. And last IETF received support on the mail list, comments and support. I hope it's good to go forward.
So we did, I think we actually pulled it at the last meeting, didn't we?
Yes.
How many folks in the room would prefer to see it progress now? And the second question is, how many would prefer to wait until the comments that have been raised addressed before proceeding? So those are the two questions, now or wait for another rev. So first question, how many think that this document is ready to, I see someone coming to the mic, go right ahead.
So I find this, Rob Wilson, Cisco, I find it tricky because I like the majority of this document, but I have quite a big issue in terms of the capability stuff. So if that gets solved, I'm happy to support it now. If that's not going to be solved, then I'm against it. So
Currently, the document lists the capabilities only as a major use case, not as a recommendation.
Okay,
So
that's
this should be taken out for now. And yeah, it should stay there.
Okay, so now on to the poll. I don't remember which one was on now. Now, okay. Current version, how many would like to see proceed with the current version? I would call that a few. How many would like to see an update based on the discussion today and then look at proceeding? Less. That's definitely less. You'll notice that was actually a trick question. How many would object to adopting this work? None. So that's good. So that's consistent with the poll from the last meeting of people are interested in this work, they'd like to see it proceed. It sounds like the general sense of the room, which is or sense of those who responded, which isn't a huge number, they'd like to proceed now. So we'll talk offline, the chairs, and go from there. And expect to see something on the list on this.
When I make the 00 Netmod draft, then I can address these comments anytime.
Who's next?
Jim?
Good morning, everyone. And this is the second time presenting this draft. We
Speak a little bit better, closer to the microphone.
Okay. Hello, everyone. This is the second time to present this draft. We have two related drafts. Actually, we use the first draft as a basis.
I think we have to help you with the slides. Just let us know.
Status update, actually, this draft was discussed in the last IETF meeting. We got a lot of support, but we have mixed view on the solution. So after London meeting, actually came propose another solution, focus on the long line folding, more simplified version. And we also, off draft also, we actually have offline discussion, agree, we work together, we consolidate into one in June, and we use this consolidated draft as a basis to initiate a discussion. We also got a strong support. And the change we made actually compared with the previous vision, actually we defined the folding structure such as header structure, body structure. And right now we don't include the folder structure. That's an issue we will discuss later. And we also have script actually put on appendix, and we add the additional cursor, and we remove the total test based on the many discussion. And we summarize the discussion on the list. We want to report back to open issue. Next.
Try the clicker now.
Try to click.
Okay.
No.
No.
Oh, well.
Yeah. Actually, we have two open issues. The first one is the auto indentation support. The second one is artwork auto extraction support. For the first open issue, we have 4 proposals we'd like to discuss with the audience. The second issue, we already have discussion on the list, and we have proposal. And for first issue, right now the current draft only support the line folding or wrapping. And so for this open issue, the goal is actually we add the indentation support and to improve readability. And right now this auto indentation feature can apply to such as JSON, XML, split or some code split, but it doesn't work well for the UML diagram. So we have 4 proposals. Next. The first one, we propose, the next indent with fixed offset, we use the two space offset. So just like this example, before the folding, we have Lona in the art worker, so there's no mistake here. Now after folding, we can indent we can split the Lona into two lines. We'll indent the second line with two space from the left. So the benefit to take this proposal is this, because we use backslash here to split the line. So this kind of backslash placement can be the fixed or variable. And so this actually has been discussed on the list. And we think the variable placement can support the Martin's proposal for the semi-manual approach. For the downside, we don't see any downside for this proposal. Next. The next one is very similar to the first proposal we proposed to for left indentation with the two space offset related to the previous line. So the benefits is the same. Actually, for the downside is different from the previous proposal. We need to identify the style character in the second line. So this is complexity we need to tackle. Next.
Jim, are these the old sites? Are these the old sites?
Yes.
Okay, let's see if we can find them current sites.
The third proposal, we actually allow the variable indent. We use two marker. And so we can see the example in the artwork after folding, actually, we can use two backslash here as to split the line. And the benefit to do this, actually, we can support, like where everything between and including the two backslash can be stripped. And we also support the variable length indentation. But the downside is this kind of approach is not conventional, especially for the average reader. And maybe it may produce unreadable results when the long line can be folded in multiple times. Next. The first proposal, actually, we just support the right indentation, quite similar to the left indentation. The benefit is same as the first proposal, but the downside is this kind of approach is also not conventional. Also, we also believe, actually, whether it take a left intent or right intent is implementation specific. That's for proposal. We actually we also believe, actually, the proposal 1 and proposal 2 is what we recommend, and we'd like to hear your feedback on this.
Robert and Cisco, I think it might be useful if you had some examples of Yang tree output, where the folding's happening on that tree, because I think that some of the other proposals here are aimed at making those more readable and close to how people would naturally probably write indent a vat like a leaf or something, whereas this is a sort of strict approach to how it's been done. So that may be more useful. The examples here, I think what you've got, then it's fairly clear probably what the right one is to do, but for the others, examples, I don't think it's quite so clear.
Hello, Rob. This is Adrian. I actually got up when you said the word examples. So I'm a co-author of this, and I've been a little bit asleep at the wheel for the last few words. But in my opening my editor, I've got a pile of examples that I want to drop into the draft. I'm not sure that those examples help resolve the question that Chu is asking about the different options. But my concern is not just auto-folding, which I think was where Kent was coming from, because I write my drafts in XML, handcrafted XML like my father's farmer did. And when I do that, I sort of automatically insert the indentation spacing that I like to see, or that I want to create in the output text file. And therefore the unfolding has to support that. And I think that that, whichever option we choose for the auto forwarding, we've got to support the manual crafting.
Can I just reply? So, because in terms of these examples, you go back to proposal 3, that's the one I put forward. The previous slide.
Sorry, what slide number? I got it.
So the suggestion here, I don't think it's particularly clear in this example of what's been shown, but the idea is having a marker on both lines at the end of the first line and wherever on the second line, and then you just strip everything between those two. So you've got an example where it's right to the left, and it doesn't make any difference from, say, proposal 0. You also have the option here of right indenting that second line. You put it wherever you like, and you know that you can strip all that space in between. Whereas if you have one of the cases where you're not using a fixed amount, what happens when you're trying to split a white space point? Then how do you do that? So I think one that's floating doesn't work unless you've got some way of denoting where it finishes.
We discussed this draft in the Transport and BI design team where we are developing a lot of JSON code, and we found it very useful. And the one comment I got from the members of the design team is that they would like to prefer to see the folding being done at the end of the word rather than in the middle of a word for readability. It will be much more readable if you fold at the end when you have a space rather than just in the middle of the line. If that is possible, will be a good announcement. And about your question, my personal opinion is that maybe option 2 is better because if you have some indent, you will much better read. But it's just much easier as a user to read. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's what we propose to do. Go to the second.
The clicker should work now. No? Okay.
Okay. So the second issue is about analog auto extraction supporter. Actually, in current draft, we only support the header and body structure. Right now, we don't support the footer. But without a footer, we cannot actually do the automatic analog extraction. So based on the many discussion, we actually propose a footer format. Actually, we like to hear the audience feedback on this. We think we can easily support this footer to allow the artwork auto extraction, but that means we need to extend the scope for this document. So any feedback on this?
Thank you, Ito. I think if you can add auto extraction will be much better for the user perspective, because you can get the document, you can get the code from the document, unfold automatically, and then run validation and do the changes that you need to do, rather than manually take it out from the draft, which when you have a big code is going to be painful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next.
Sorry, Kent as a contributor. So extraction is a good idea, but I think it needs to apply to all examples, not just those that have been folded. So I think the extraction solution probably needs to be independent of the folding solution.
Yeah. Okay. So for the follow-up, we think we got a lot of support. We request working group to consider adopt this kind of work. And we will actually issue a new revision based on the discussion on this in this meeting.
How many people think that this is work that we should be doing in the working group? Sorry. I think that's a pretty good number. You said you want to do another revision.
Yeah, we prefer actually later because right now we think the folder is a good basis.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Bojan Bogdanovic. Some of the here, especially the artwork, it is wider applicable. Thank you. It is wider applicable than just within this working group.
And then maybe moving it to the ops area working group would be a better place to do it than in just here in the working group because it's a smaller audience.
Count as a contributor. I was having coffee yesterday with Heather Flanagan, RFC editor, and I mentioned this draft, and she made the recommendation to reach out to Henrik, who maintains the XMed RFC tool, because ideally it would be folded into that tool. The thinking being that only text-based presentation format needs to be folded. If the presentation format is HTML or something else, then really would not want for it to be folded. And similarly, for extraction purposes, if it's, for instance, the XML format, you don't need to have any tags for doing extraction. It'll already be inside tags. So perhaps it's orthogonal to this. It's another issue. It's something to think about. But let's maybe reach out to Henrik and the tools team and see what we can do to facilitate future integration of this work.
Speaking with, this is Lou with definitely not contributor, but another hat, I'm not sure which hat. I think we should decide what we want to be done and then ask tooling to do it. I don't think we should be constrained by what the tooling is today. The tools are generally changeable. Let's figure out what the right answer is, and then also figure out where we document it, whether it be a standalone document or this document or somewhere else. But I would strongly encourage not talking to the tools team until we know what we want to do.
Adrian Farrell again. So Dan was just mentioning artwork, and I think there's a bit of a confused history because when we used to document sort of fragments of Yang as examples, we tended to put them inside the artwork XML pragmas to stop them getting reformatted. So artwork was in our head, but this document actually recommends against using wrapping on conventional artwork, pictures of networks and things. I think we should go more strongly again and say, do not use this for artwork. If you're doing ASCII art and you can't fit it in the, whatever it is, 68 columns, then wrapping it is just going to make it worse.
So you're saying, I interpret that as wrapping long lines in Yang models, well, sure, go for it. Wrapping long lines in artwork, fix your artwork.
Yeah, and that then goes to the question, where should this work happen? If we collapse back to just doing Yang examples, then that lives here, in my opinion. If we want to put artwork in, then it probably comes out, it's not even ops area, it's just, it's global.
Right, so that would be an RFC editor discussion then, or RFC format discussion, excuse me, not editor discussion.
Just to follow up on that, the draft says in section 4.1, it is not recommended to use this solution for graphical artwork, and you're thinking it should be a must not be used.
Okay, so it sounds like we still have good interest. You're going to do another revision. And at that point, the chairs will talk with the authors of whether they want to poll at that point or continue as individual. Thank you. Thank you. Shufang. I guess it's Shufang for Igor, is that correct?
Yes. Good morning. I'm Shufang from Water Networks. So here we're talking about the pictures today for the draft is automation. We need automation.
See if it's on. There's an on-off switch on the side.
Turn off. Yeah.
Excellent.
The purpose of the draft is that we want to do automations in NetConf RESTConf servers. Currently, the NetConf server or RESTConf servers already contains a lot of information. We have configuration data, we have operational data, operational states. The client can do the edit config, can retrieve the state, can get notification, can ask do some RPCs, do all kind of actions, but only one step at a time. So we have a need to do more automation on this. I think we can do better to automatically put some of the steps together, like the server to do now. So the proposal we have here is you use a simple Yang model to describe a mechanism. We call it ECA, Event Condition Action Mechanism. So the reason we want to have this mechanism is that we can make the client easier to use the network. We can have the response time quicker. So we can also make the network more programmable. So for this event condition action mechanism, we define the event condition and action in the model. We also introduce the policy variable so that we can store some, like any kind of programming language, we can store some intermediate states in the variables. So now you can read and write some intermediate states, and we can store some information there also. Then we define the condition, the events. Events is the trigger of the mechanism, which can be what we define in NetConf notification events, which is currently worked by the Yang push group of drafts. So we use that result and trigger our mechanism. Then the server will evaluate the current server conditions and decided what to do. The condition can be grouped into a certain logic, and we evaluate all of them. And if we decided to further, we use the EC action. The action can be any NetConf, RESTConf actions, can be edit config, can be RPC call, can also be trigger some further notification. So that's the structure we have. So this model is not complicated. If you look at draft, should be fairly simple. We have a ECE structure. We have local variables and global variables, and we can have a list of actions and conditions. So this those. I think the draft was presented earlier in NetConf and Netmod. So the chair has decided we put the draft here in this working group to be the whole. So since last time we have some changes. We refined the model, so now we can have the connection between this model and the Yang push model. Yang push model said we have a event notification stream, and we can define subscription. So from that subscription, we'll have a link between that subscription and this ECA events. Then we also, after all the ECA action chain, then we can also send the notification using the Yang push normal notification mechanism, send the result back to the client. So for the first portion of the change, when the client we can first need to define the notification subscription and use that subscription. We also define the ECA event and put them together. The server will intercept such kind of a subscription, and instead of logging the notification, sending the notification back to the client directly, we intercept them and send to this ECA mechanism, and then we can trigger the subsequent condition evaluation and the triggering further actions. Then we have the result. The result was we have specified our own notification format and send our own notification back to the client. Those notifications contain the result of the automation states, either the final result fail or success, and then the client get notified and with the final or intermediate states. So that's all we have for the presentation for today. So we really like to hear more from the working group.
Kent, as chair, I'd like to get the working group's opinion on the interest level in this work. If you are interested in this work, please raise your hand. It's a reasonable number. And if you're not interested in this work, please raise your hand. A few, very few, probably.
We also have implications from other working groups because for example, in the TS working group, the ACTM, we were talking about ACTM mechanism, and this is one of the important features.
Okay, thank you. From Jabber, Andy Bierman says, support the problem, not at all the solution.
Yeah, we can discuss for them.
Oh, sorry, not all the solution. Big difference. Well, yeah, that's what I heard, Andy, more than read Andy. Sorry, Andy.
Tim Carey, Nokia, because I thought when we talked about this last time, again, I think I go with Andy in the sense that we know we have the problem, but I think between here and there was a finite state, and there was a couple ways of doing this that we were still trying to figure out, and there was some direction from 101 that said, hey, you guys get together and see if we can come in with a decent solution. And I don't know if that happened.
Yeah, we actually were going to get there and ask that exact question. So
I was going off.
But I'd be interested in hearing the author's responses. You know, did you talk to the author of the next draft, the FSM draft, Shufeng?
Sorry, I didn't attend the London meeting.
Yeah, so it was just take a look at the FSM draft and see if see overlap.
We did work the finance state we're talking about, right? So,
Yeah.
Right. So at higher level, trying to aim for the same kind of goal, but the solution I think is not that much, not very same, right? So.
All right. So you look at it, you see it as different. Joel, one sec. There's Jabber. Yep. And Q ahead of you. Jabber.
Yeah, you go ahead.
Okay. Thanks. So from Jabber, Jürgen asked the question is, does the working group have the resources to work on things, on the things we take on? So that's I think a chair question. As chair, my view is we're contribution driven. So if people bring things to the working group and the working group is interested in expending energy there, that's what we take on. And of course I have co-chairs, so I'd like to hear their opinion.
Yeah, Joe Yeagley, not speaking as a chair. I think it would actually be I think it would be a little weird for us to progress this one and the one that comes behind it. Like they sort of seem
related to each other sufficiently that, like, it looks like the working group or the working group participants are exploring the problem and solution space, and like there's probably a synthesis of all the work that's being done around this that comes out of that, right? I'm not sure that that's a particular document. The idea of working in this space seems appropriate, but I'm not sure either this document or the subsequent one are necessarily like the place that we should be when we get to adopting something. And I say that as a contributor and not, or as a idiot in the working group and not as someone with a great deal of experience or with respect to channeling the chair's opinion.
I'll basically say +1 with chair hat on. Unless we understand there's two problems here, we shouldn't be progressing two documents that seem to cover the same solution space. My reading of it is personal, as chair, personal, is that this one seems a little more generic, but it's still a little hard to figure out whether that's the right read. So I think, I think your comment of there's more discussion and feedback is just right. You really got to spend some more time with this other document, figuring out where there's overlap and where there's not. And if you think there's not overlap, it would be good to clearly identify what problem this document is solving. That and the next author, who's I see is remote but is online, really needs to figure out what different problem they're addressing. But I don't see two documents going forward right now, as Joel was saying, with whatever hat he was saying.
Kent is co-chair, +1 to that as well. We should look to see how we can bring these two documents together if possible.
Okay.
Right, or clearly identify the different problems that they're trying to
Yes.
address, and then we can figure out as a working group whether we were interested in both problems.
And also regarding Jürgen's question, I understand that we're contribution driven, and as long as there's interest in the contributions to move forward, but also it does seem sometimes like there's no notion of prioritization. Holistically, like we seem like we want to work on many different things independently, but holistically, then it seems like some things should be more important than others. And I mean, it's not really unique to this working group, but I think every working group. So perhaps others with more experience or ADs could, how do other working groups address this problem?
I'm not sure we want to have a working group philosophy discussion right here. I mean, I've been in other working groups where basically as more contributions come in, you actually can do more work because there's now more people able to work in parallel. So it actually works out okay, and the workload can dramatically increase. That doesn't always work. So we have to figure out what's right for this group. But generally our process is being driven by contributions, we're sort of more bottom up than top down. So, of course, the AD can chime in if he'd like.
Ignas Bogdanas, that you asked. So these two documents seem to be focusing more on the actual problem space of usability than on the modeling paradigms themselves. And the FSM one originally was in OPS AWG and came here because the feeling there was that it is generic enough to be used as, say, generic mechanism for modeling the state machines. I don't have a strong feeling whether this should be done here or in some other working group. But one question that I would like to have an answer is whether this is an experiment to do something or whether there are actual uses for both of these documents.
I can't speak to the second one, but I think the author just said that there's an implementation. Did you say or did I misunderstand what you were saying?
We had this discussion in other applications and need that, but I I don't think we have reached the point to have a full implementation yet. So that could be something we can experiment with.
I will comment that there is a slight difference between having an implementation and having a use for that.
Agreed.
When you do have an implementation, I bet you'll have a state machine. So, like, I think that's part of the reason I see, like, synthesis as a potential route forward with this, because that's something that happens as you get closer to having that.
That's funny. All right, well, thank you. At this point, we look forward to the work progressing and are very interested in your report back of any conversations you have with the next presenter.
Thank you.
So we're going to try a remote presentation here.
Hi, can you hear me?
We do, we hear you.
Yeah, good. Hi, good morning. So, yes, this draft presents a young model for the finite state for a finite state machine. Please, the next slide. So the aim of the objective of this draft is to increase the programmability of network elements. So we identified some use cases. One is to pre-instruct data plane devices of an optical network, for example, does optical transponders. About the reconfiguration settings in case of physical layer changes. So, for example, in case of physical layer degradations. The objective is to install this finite state machine into the agent of the transponder, so that if something happens, the transponder, the agent already knows what to do, and it can apply the reconfiguration settings, so based on the physical layer conditions, so the proper modulation formats, the coding, and so on. Another use case is related to network telemetry, and another one that we identified is related to the monitoring of packet loss. So regarding a question related to the previous talk about the implementation, we did an implementation of the finite state machine, and we tested in lab and also in a field trial at Telecom Italia for what concerns the first use case, so the reconfiguration of the transponders in an optical network. So the field trial was successful, and the transponder was able to automatically reconfigure without querying or asking something to the SDN controller because it was pre-installed. So we next slide, please. So this slide describes the first use case. So while the connection is active, an SDN controller can instruct by installing the finite state machine into the agent of the data plane devices. So if something changes at the physical layer, the data plane already knows what to do, and the reaction can be faster. The second use case. Next slide, please. The second use case is related to network telemetry. Here, the objective is to reduce telemetry bandwidth through on-demand data collection. So in this case, we can see network probes as a finite state, can be described, network probes as a finite state machine. So based on the state, we send data stream, telemetry stream to the network telemetry applications, so we can optimize the bandwidth of the telemetry stream. The third use case, next slide please, is related to IT performance measurements. So here the scenario is that it is an SDN controller application for performance measurement. The idea is that we can calibrate how too deep go through the monitoring data. So we consider here a clustering approach. So the network can be divided in clusters, in regions, so more or less deep into the network, and we can retrieve monitoring performance measurement related to each cluster. Here, the finite state machine can be used, and because can be associated to a specific cluster division. Next slide. So here we go through the Young model. The Young model consists of a list of states. So, for example, regarding the transponder, the use case of the transponder, each state can correspond to a specific settings of the transmission parameter of the transponder, and to each state, a list of transition is associated to each state, and we can go from a state to another state when something changes. So, for example, in the case of the optical network, when bit error rate increase. We can see some attribute, for example, a filter attribute. It can be used to describe more deeply the transition, for example, to put thresholds in the bit error rate increase. And then each transition is associated to a list of actions that, for the case of the transponder, could be the change of the modulation format and the change of the code rate and so on. So this list of action, we have an attribute execute that that actually implements the change, the action, and then we can go to a next action, and finally to a next state. So this Young model has been described more into details in C-Camp group for the use case of the transponder. So more details can be found in another draft of the C-Camp. Next slide, please. Well, in summary, we describe a finite state machine with respect to the previous version of the draft, which was presented in London. We clarified here in this new version so we put some clarifications about the use cases. Well, and that's it. We'd like to ask for the adoption. That's the aim. Thanks.
So I think the adoption part's going to fall into the same category as the last draft. Were you able to hear the discussion that went on the last draft?
Sorry?
Did you hear the discussion that took place related to the previous draft?
Yeah, I had the discussion about the previous draft. Yes.
Well, so it'd be good to hear your views on that, specifically, where you think the overlap is, if you think you're solving a different problem, the same problem.
Well, I think that I have two impressions. My first impression is that this draft is more generic than the other one. And then I have another impression, but I'm not sure about this. I have to better understand the other draft. Maybe we can have an offline discussion with the other authors. But my impression is that their draft is more associated to a central controller, while here the objective is to give a sort of intelligence to the agent. So trying to avoid the overloading of the SDN controller.
Okay, I think what you've just said about getting together with the other authors offline makes a lot of sense. And it would be very good, the result of that discussion to be a description of what problem each is solving and how they are solving, they're taking different approaches to solve the same problem, or whether they are solving two different problems.
Okay.
And that would be, I think, very helpful to the working group.
Okay. Fine to me.
If you could work with them and come back with that information, that'd be really good. And you don't have to wait till the next meeting to report the information.
We could do earlier. Okay, fine to me.
And that goes to both authors. Shifan was nodding his head or saying yes also. So that's great. Thank you so much. Look forward to hearing the results of that. And with that, we're going to move on to our last speaker, and he's also remote. By the way, thank you very much for the remote presentation. It worked really well.
So, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we do. Your slides are still coming up. Just give it a moment.
Can you hear me clearly?
Yes. Go ahead, please. Please proceed. Okay, we have.
It seems my colleagues are not here, so I can present this topic. Here we present document to propose a young data model for tax plus. And why we should do this work is because if we review IETF system young module, it can cover some basic function for the user's authentication, but it's a lack of feature or some parameters to support the user authorization or accounting. And also, the current system young module cannot support the tax plus server. So we propose this young data module to address these issues. And also, as I know, a lot of vendors has implemented the tax plus in their device. And they also have their private young data module. So I think it may be an issue should be discussed. It maybe should define some standard module to support the tax plus. So we propose this document to introduce some TACAS Young module. And here is present the solution. We augment IETF system module with some TACAS attribute, and here is some TACAS template. This template is being used to configure a set of TACAS server that with a defined domain, and each domain may define maintains a user list in the same user domain format. And if TACAS client receives a request from user, and the TACAS template can be selected to based on the domain, so they can carry the with users. And also TACAS server may have the three attributes set. It's for user authentication, user authorization, and user content. And so, okay. Oh, okay. Okay. From before this meeting, we have some comments from the email list, and Alex gave us a lot of valuable comments, and we also discussed with him maybe we'd like to prepare another version to address this issue. But I think this work is really need to do because it already have a lot of Winter have implemented the TACAS Plus, and the standard and young document I think is valuable work.
Joe Yeagley. So I didn't make it to OPS-AWG, but was there an attempt to discuss that there since the TACX work is also being done? Or I should say the TACX drafts, to the extent that they exist, are actually there right now?
Yes, we in OPS-AWG working group, we also have systems in OPS-AWG. Maybe we need solicit more comments from the TACAS Plus, some expert focus on TACAS Plus, and also discuss with Joe, and maybe we can discuss more and call more people attention and improve this young document.
Yeah, so my understanding is one of the reasons why there's actually TACX work going on at all right now is because there's some effort on the part of the maintainers to add some new security functions to sort of and remove some obsolescent features of TACX. So there's sort of the notion of a draft that represents the historical implementation of TACX, and then maybe some drafts that apply improvements to that. And I think that any improvements that come down the pipe or that are proposed are actually probably rather important to include in the model. But I see the AD, who's also responsible for that working group, actually standing behind me, so I'm going to let him speak.
Joe Clark, wearing OPS-AWG co-chair hat. So yes, as was brought up, we mentioned it in OPS-AWG. We didn't have an agenda slot for it. I agree that, Joel, with everything you said, essentially. We are trying to document how TACX is implemented today in the industry and get vendors who've implemented clients and servers to feed back into that. We are not looking to add more to that draft, but it seems that this work might fit in that working group. And certainly, as you said, Joel, as additional drafts come out to change or to add features specifically around security to TACX, if there is to be a model to configure it, that work would have to fold into this.
Ignas Bagdonas. To give a perspective of the TACAX work, the current work is to document what is there, not to work on the additional features and other things. Well, this needs to be finalized. TACAX is widely deployed, and that's a commodity service. So from a perspective of that it is used, yes, certainly a model for that seems to be needed. One concern that I would have is that it's not only the TACAX, it's also the radios, which is frequently used for similar things. And if we look from a system perspective, those two protocols can be selected by the choice of the deployment, or basically by the user. So maybe it would be a good idea to try to work a little bit on the overall external authentication authorization system framework, and then have TACAX and radios put into that. It's not a hard suggestion, but that's from a practical usability perspective, that might seem a reasonable thing to do. As of where the work could happen, as the protocol work is happening in OPSI WG, logically the model work might be a good home for that.
Why we why we upload this document to Netmod is because we think there are some function or some attributes should be should comply with IETF system module. We think this can augment and extend the system IETF system module, and to cover some attribute or some feature currently not covered. That's why we want to apply it. Why we send this draft to current working group. So also,
I'm not certain that this is a strong argument. Certainly, the protocol models can augment some of elements if they need.
Yeah, I think the chairs agree with the comment, with the AD's comment.
Okay, thank you.
Also, I think that what you're talking about is that the common framework makes a lot of sense. Would you think that the common framework still belongs over there? By the way, I'm happy with either answer. Actually, I probably think that the common framework might be better tied to the actual protocol. So what's your recommendation?
You're asking hard questions, because if we are looking at the practical system, how that uses authentication sources, it's not only TACAX and radios. There might be local store, there might be something else. And if we look this way, it quite quickly gets into the netconf key store topics. It gets into other key store topics. I don't have an answer for that right now, but if we look from the user perspective, certainly flooding different mechanisms for using similar functionality is not the right thing. Maybe some thinking needs to happen around with the authors, and both from a key store side, both from a TACAX side, probably involve the IPsec model authors, and see whether there is commonality in that. Do you want?
Joel Yeagley, as a chair at this point, like if there were extensions to TACAX that were to come in via the model, I would think that would possibly be inappropriate and dangerous at this point, since we're still working on documenting TACAX itself. But like those extensions would definitely be, this is the sort of thing that Ops AWG would be looking at in light of the fact that they actually sort of own the progressing of TACAX itself. So I wouldn't want to see those come in through the model without having treatment somewhere else also.
So if you could spend a little time trying to work on that higher level framework that Ignas is referring to, and come back with a proposal, that would be very useful. And then from there, we can figure out which working group it belongs in. But clearly, the TAC Act specific work does not belong here.
Okay, thank you.
So maybe coming back to that topic, as there is now system authentication, maybe there needs to be more global nodes for system authorization and system accounting. And then from those ties to the protocol specific norms.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not suggesting this, I'm just asking a question.
Okay,
Okay, thank you very much.
thank you.
I think we've managed to fill up the whole time. So we finished the session. Thank you for staying here to the last day, and we will see you in Bangkok.
And if you haven't signed the blue sheet, please come up here. I have one, and there should be another one somewhere.